Yes. Okay.
We got lots of people joining, and for those of you curious what's with the small talk, we're just giving a few minutes for a few more folks to join us. I am excited about the content today. I think we have, I don't know, I mean, I couldn't think of someone with more qualifications and laurels to tout than Shona Pinnock. I'm so glad that you are willing to be with us today.
Thank you. And thanks for the invitation. I'm excited for the conversation.
Yeah, it's going to be, I'm interested. I mean, like the slide here doesn't say we're going to talk about how to be an anti-racist organization. A little bit open-ended, I suppose, as far as the title, but that's actually is something I want to really get into. Our company's been trying to learn a lot. You know, honestly, like the term anti-racism, new to me from the last few months. You know, I went and read Kendi and I saw him give a bunch of talks and I saw other people picking that up and expanding on it. I mean, there is so much intellectual work that has been happening on topics of racism and anti-racism this last decade, you know, like it has a very long history, but like the gap between Ferguson and then George Floyd this spring, a lot happened actually. A lot of like really deep thinking and work, and I think it shows in the hopeful signs of progress perhaps that we're starting to notice.
Yeah, I definitely see a shift in how people are responding and how corporations are responding. So I think that that's a good thing. And I think that that's the difference in terms of what we've seen in the past. We've seen the uprisings, but I don't know if we've seen such a defined and definitive corporate response to it. So it's like,
right.
I think that the like corporate America understands like, okay, we have to change now. Like it's not just about, and that's the definition of anti-racism, is to actually putting in work and creating policy and shifting the discussion.
How's my sound for you, Shona? Because maybe we'll get started soon. There was a little bubble there in the audio for a few seconds. Hopefully we got a kink worked out of our system there. All right, so I gotta introduce you, Shona. This is long, so for all of everyone joining, I know you're eager for the conversation, but I think it's important to ground it on the depth of expertise that Shona's got for us. Your role right now, Diversity and Inclusion Director at Meredith Corporation, which is, it might be one of the biggest magazine companies in the world. I suspect it is, right? I mean, it's got all these titles.
In the US, yes.
In the US. So there's People, Better Homes and Gardens, Real Simple, Martha Stewart Living, and then recently also like the Time Inc. portfolio as well, right? Maybe before we kick all the way into it, I should ask for a little audio check. Musa, how's my sound? How's Shona's sound? How are we doing?
Your sound is good. I think Shona's breaking up a little bit, and we'll see if we can get that clean.
Okay. Okay, yeah, I'll do a little more of the introduction. So a big important role on D&I at Meredith, which is a big important company. But she comes to it from decades in human resources, a bunch of different areas, industries. I mean, I'm particularly, I love Consumer Reports, the nonprofit and magazine, where you had a similar role, right? Diversity and Inclusion Officer, Human Resources Director. And it's pretty cool. I don't know how you get yourself named by Digiday as the most committed to diversity and inclusion, but hopefully we'll talk about that. And even the real estate business before that, right? So maybe we can talk about how racist real estate is. I think the real estate business, just the industry stinks, and it may be one of the tougher ones if we want to move the needle on racism. But a wealth of excellent experience. And I guess you're relatively new now at Meredith, right?
Yeah, about 10 months.
So maybe we can start by talking a little bit about where you came from. How on earth does Consumer Reports get named the most committed to diversity and inclusion?
Well, we started our diversity and inclusion program. We started out with a survey. We started out with actually doing focus groups and talking to the staff and getting an understanding of where the organization was and the readiness for it. And then we began building out our employee resource groups. We later renamed them business resource groups because we really wanted to highlight that they were there to be an internal focus group really for the business as the business was looking to build out and expand their audiences. And so, those business resource groups really helped to identify the areas and opportunities for Consumer Reports, help with recruitment, help to educate the organization on, the many aspects of diversity. And so as we began putting together that package for our award, and then we also were measuring and looking at our recruitment and seeing with that focus effort, how we could and did increase the internal diversity. And so those were the elements of what we put together for the Digiday Award, and we were really excited to give that recognition.
I suspect other organizations have a process that looks like that, right? But how do you make it effective? I mean, it is so often that a company will have some good intentions and publish some metrics, but how do you get impact? There must have been some kind of magic in there, things that you were watching out for and trying to do different so you wouldn't end up in that same old place that some companies find themselves in.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was the focus, and most organizations build a strategy that's similar. I'm looking to build a strategy similar at Meredith, but I know just based on my work with, and as a human resources professional, that it's really about those daily conversations that happen and understanding the nature of bias and how that works and how that infuses into different processes like performance management, hiring, really the employee life cycle, right? So understanding that and trying to intervene in those ways, I think helped us to move the needle. I do think that organizationally at that point, we were committed to it, right? We were making sure that we had updates, that we were accountable in a way and reporting back to the organization. So it's kind of like, if we know that we have to report back in 3 months, we want to make sure that we're saying something different, that we've moved the needle in a way. And so it was having the leadership be involved in that process. But I really think it came from the employee population really pushing this work. The employees are the folks that were really doing the heavy lifting. And we can talk about more about how I see that shifting, but I definitely feel like the work that our employee resource groups did was really pivotal and critical to that success.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What are some of the markers? I mean, at Notel, so we've decided to be really ambitious, right? We're like, all right, no longer good enough to just sort of coast on your good intentions.
Yep.
In fact, not even good enough to not be racist. We got to move the needle.
Yeah.
Just push it in the other direction. We have to correct for the system that we're all part of, and therefore, makes us guilty of a lot of stuff that I think is both conscious and unconscious. I mean, I suspect there's more that's conscious than folks would be willing to really admit.
Agree.
But if you want to set yourself on an ambitious, like, what are the markers that you've got enough organizational commitment, right? So you mentioned you held yourself accountable and wanted to be able to say something in 3 months, but how'd you know you weren't on a fool's errand? Mm-hmm. Did you report to the board? Did the CEO set a goal? Was there enough budget, or was there a budget? Like, how do you get yourself the markers that, okay, the org really wants to do this?
Yeah, so we did set a goal. We were at about 23% of ethnic diversity. And we also wanted to carve out what we meant by diversity. And so we identified what we meant in that discussion. This was about increasing the amount of ethnic diversity at the company. And so we were at 23%, and I don't remember if it was 2015, somewhere in that time frame. And we set a goal to be at 30% by 2019, 2020. And we felt slightly short of that, but I'm glad that we did, because we saw that it was something that was, and it was an ambitious goal. But having the goal helped us to move the work forward, right? If we knew we were working toward that 20%, this is what it looks like. This is what it looks like in terms of how many people we need to hire, how many people we need to retain. And that's a big part of the equation, is the retention piece. And so we charted out on that course. We did have, and like I said, I think that we had leaders that were invested in making that happen and understanding we do need to see a diverse slate, even though there were missteps in that. Even if you are seeing a diverse slate, we still were making hiring decisions that were not leading us to increase that. And so, but having the ability to look at that and say, okay, you had a diverse slate, what happened? Like, let's debrief and talk through that. And so it is a very iterative process around like how we get to a better place. It's muscle memory, and it's disrupting human behavior. And so in that, you have to like learn a new skill, and it takes a lot of conversations. And I think as a human resources person, understanding people, understand that part well. That it's not just about setting the goals, creating the strategy. It's about, okay, now how am I going to change the behavior of an organization? And that's honestly, for me, the most challenging part.
The goal is the thing that it seems like a lot of this flows from. It sounds like it was very tangible, quite challenging. You had yourself a timeline. And once the company says, hey, we got to do this, it seems like a lot of things flow from that. You now have permission to say, well, if you believe in this thing, we're going to have to spend money on that. We're going to have to hire someone to do that. We're going to have to change this meeting in this way. And then I suppose you sort of test and see if this thing is moving the needle for you, and then you try something different, and that's how you get that journey going. I mean, It's kind of the way you do any other business objective, right? I mean,
right. And it's not about, it's about the things that we do, but it's also about the things that we stop doing. And so a lot of times when you have the discussion around diversity and inclusion with business people, and business people are generally focused on efficiency. How can I most quickly get this thing up and running? How can I most quickly get this person on? But when you're having the discussion around diversity, I'm actually asking you to slow down. I'm asking you to stop and think and not do the thing that feels natural and feels easily accessible. So if you have an open role, what is accessible to most people is to say, oh, my college buddy's kid needs a new job. Let me put
hit the ground running, that kind of excuse. Yeah.
There. And I'm asking you to stop. I'm asking you to look at multiple people, and I'm asking you to, hopefully we get the best person and that person is diverse, but then what does that mean? And so when we say we're bringing new ideas and perspectives to the table, will this person disrupt the way that the business or the division operates? And if you know that, then how do you plan in advance for that? And so like one thing is the recruitment piece, but the retention piece is actually more important, because we have to be intentional about creating that environment where people are allowed to succeed, where different perspectives are allowed to flow and be successful. Right. And so a lot of times you see all of the stats that diverse teams perform better, diverse companies perform better. And it's not just because they're diverse. It's because the organization has learned how to leverage that diversity in a way that gets you to a better end goal. Right. And so that's the beauty of diversity, is that you have a focus group around that table, and you have people testing, you have people questioning, you have people saying, well, have we thought about it this way? So you have all of that happening before you even go to market. And so the hope is that you get a better end product at the end of the day, at the end of that exercise. But it takes a lot to get there.
I was hoping for easy answers, Shona.
It's not easy. So when I think about the nature of disenfranchisement, the nature of marginalization, it's not that we just marginalize people. It's a bunch of little things that we do, right? And even if you think about racism, it's a bunch of little things that are woven together that create an environment where some people are not allowed to succeed. So similar to that, in order to make people succeed, it's a bunch of little things that you have to do in order to create space for different ideas, for different people. Like, I know that I'm not the traditional corporate leader. I know that. I know that I have an edge. I'm not, I'm educated, yes, but I am very much, in your face, very.
Well, that's the Bronx in you. I mean, if you had been raised in Queens like me.
Right, and so I know that I approach the business world differently than other people. So create space for someone like me who is smart and knowledgeable and able, just like you create spaces for people who fit the mold, quote unquote, right? And so that's the way that I look at diversity is creating space for the best ideas and the best people, no matter what package they come in, to actually come and advance your company and advance your business. It makes no sense to hire a bunch of people and you're not really giving them the opportunity to contribute.
Yeah. I mean, I was very pleased this last couple of years to be introduced to some of the academic research on teams and on groups, the patterns of high effectiveness. There's this group out of MIT led by Sandy Pentland that's written a bunch of books about, it's sort of organizational behavior stuff, but they observed high performance teams and they made certain experimental interventions into them, like add a person who's very junior or add a person who's very different from the rest of the composition of that group. And they confirmed the kinds of things that we find in other diversity research, that those teams perform better. And as they were observing why, it's literally because the person thinks differently and you now have to explain it more clearly, more different. Like, you got to get back to the basic assumptions, question your own assumptions. You can't just assume the group think will take you through and then the teams work better. It's like a very generalized result. And it is like so easy to access by just thinking, aha, diversity drives it.
Right.
I was so happy to see it because in that research, they weren't even looking for diversity. They were just looking for like teams solving puzzles or whatever.
Yeah, but it's not the path of least resistance, and so that's why most people don't do it, right? And so it is that difference. It's because diversity is difficult, which makes the end product better. It is that difficulty. You can't use the shorthand that you're used to using when you have someone different at the table. So you have to figure out different ways to explain it, which then makes you better at understanding what the thing is. If you have to explain it multiple times, then you get better at it. And so
that's true. Yeah.
It is that process that causes the team to begin to perform better, because you have to create a new language, you have to create a new set of understanding, and it's that difficulty, and it takes longer. And so again, that's another reason why most companies fail at it, is because it's not the easy thing to do.
Well, let's make our problem harder now. A few months ago, if you and I were talking in January, singing the gospel of diversity would have been a straightforward thing and would have been like, it's important, let's improve by 1% a year for the next 7 years and win a big prize.
Right.
I don't think that's good enough anymore. And I think in some of the conversations folks have been having around anti-racism, some folks are throwing shade on DEI itself. Like, oh, it's a Band-Aid. No, we got to be way more ambitious here. Don't be satisfied that your pipeline's better or that, maybe the employee population mix is representative. That's not good enough. All you're doing is subjecting those people to the systemic racism that's in society, that's in the industry, that's in your company.
Right.
You got to be way more ambitious. Talk to me about this. I mean, is this like you were waiting for this, or you're like, oh my God, or like this is our moment, or I mean, what's your feeling?
All of the above, all of it, all of it. So yes, like I was saying, I do think it is, you know, D&I strategy across the board is going to be very similar. You have to look at the workforce, look at the workplace, look at the marketplace. And so most strategies will have those elements. To me, the nuance is now, as we look at the anti-racism, is like, okay, we understand historically what has been done and what has caused, you know, people of color, Black people to be disadvantaged. So now it's not enough to just say, okay, well, I've given you a job. Boom, there you are. No, no, no. You now have to help that person, not because they are less intelligent, but because they have had less access to the nuanced things that make people successful. Now you have to pour that into them so that they can level up, right? And so it's about, how do you have conversations? How do you mentor folks? How do you, and I've said this time and time again, throughout my career, I have not been mentored. I've had to mentor myself. I've had to think about, okay, you just had that meeting. I have to, you know, figure out, like, I've looked at the faces in the room. How did I do? I don't know, because nobody's going to tell me. So I have to figure that thing out. So you need to now figure out, once you have that diversity, how are you pouring into that person to get them ready? If you're bringing them to different tables, how are you preparing them for that? And how are you preparing the people who are already at the table to receive them? And so that's sort of the incremental extra work that we're requiring our leaders to do. How are you proactively having discussions around performance and development and growth, right? You can't just hire people.
But with race in the conversation, yeah?
You can have race. I want this to be across the board, but I mean, especially, right, for people of color that are coming into the space. So this should be practices. So my belief is—
well, hang on. I want to press you a little bit more. I want to press you. I mean, how woke are you supposed to be here? Like, okay, managers, please make sure you're having those feedback conversations with all your people. You got to understand that African-American colleagues of ours maybe are not whatever attuned to some of the things these other people are attuned to. You got to make sure you're giving your feedback really explicitly, because we've seen this pattern, it's a risk. But then are we also in the conversation saying, I think that I have unconscious bias. I think our colleagues have it. I think there's stuff that you're doing and saying and I'm doing and saying that's not connecting because of us coming from different places. Like, how far are we?
Yeah.
Where should we go? When does it get too uncomfortable?
For me, it doesn't ever get too uncomfortable. I am very comfortable in discomfort. I'm very comfortable in conflict. And I'm very adept at leading people through those discussions, right? And so I've had situations where I've had a colleague come to me, a person of color, saying, you know what, I feel like I'm being treated differently than my white counterpart who is in a similar role than I am. She gets a lot more attention than I get. She gets a lot more development than I get. She gets a lot more face time with our manager than I get. And so I'm going to have that conversation with the manager to say, okay, here are the concerns. And like, so let's talk about what's going on. Let's talk about what the issues are and how do we get to the end or some sense of resolution. And even having that conversation in the space with people who feel as if they're allies, right? That's the most difficult conversation, is that if I'm approaching someone who considers themselves an ally and saying, well, here's the experience of the people of color on your team, you know, and dealing with the tears, dealing with the resistance, dealing with the defensiveness around that, but we have to get through it, right? And so I'm okay with allowing you to have your moment, to have your tears, and we're going to regroup and talk through how we're going to move the needle in this discussion.
All right, well, clearly I would want you on my team doing something like this, something as tough as this, but let's talk about expanding the sphere of influence. And there's an interesting question from the audience about this. Because some of the mechanics you just gave are kind of one-on-one small format mechanics, all right? But now, now we're gonna talk about it as a company. We're gonna say, this is important to us. And we wanna get people, we wanna move them along a little bit, right? We wanna get them to a spot where they might be doing those conversations, but without you in the room.
Yeah.
I mean, an all hands, like a total company discussion, I mean, surely you guys went through some stuff these last few months. Our company did too. It was just like a crisis of identity in our company.
Yeah.
Do we want to teach people about anti-racism? Do we want to expose them to some concepts that maybe they're going to immediately knee-jerk against? You'll get like an all lives matter kind of reaction from some of the audience, you know?
Yes, we did that yesterday. So we actually had a 2-part series, and we called it Racy Conversation. So we, had a facilitator come in, and the first part of the discussion was just about the history of racism in America. And most people, I will say overwhelmingly, most people were happy with it, right? And felt like it was a good conversation. They learned a lot, all of those great things. There were some people that were triggered, and there were people that felt like, oh, I feel like everything is now about how terrible white people are, and so there was that resistance. And so we have to deal with that spectrum of response to it. And so the second part of the discussion was about how do we build a muscle in terms of anti-racist practices, allyship. And so that was the more constructive conversation. Again, I think people were very happy to have that discussion. I think with any organization, you have to meet them where they are. And I think you have to plan for people to be resistant, right? And I think if you believe as an organization that, this is the direction you want to go, then you have to believe that fully. Even if people are defensive, or even if people feel triggered, you have to put your head down and do that work and go through all of that. You might be able to change some minds. You might be able to shift some beliefs. You will not be able to shift everyone. But if this is your belief, then it's, you're going to have to go into it and understand that and stand by it, right? Even in the face of resistance. Because
it's so interesting, like the outline of the argument you're making here on like this principled and resolute determination to move ahead. If you took the word diversity out of our conversation and instead we're talking about a radical new marketing strategy, like we're going to bet on social media, it'd just be like, yeah, obviously we're going to bet on social media and there's going to be people who oppose us and too bad, we're going, And yet here it's somehow like everyone gets a vote or something on like whether we believe anti-racism is right. Like, how is that?
And that is the conversation, that I've been having is like, did you think that everyone is going to be on the side of this? No, because we wouldn't be here if everyone believed that everyone deserves access. So yes, there are going to be people in every organization that are like, no, I'm tired of hearing about it. It's been 2 months, enough already, right? You're going to have those folks. You're going to have those folks that I've had people, come to me and say, well, I feel like I'm colorblind, that whole thing. I just want us all to get along, all of that. So there are going to be people on that journey that are in different places. And I'm cool with that because I believe that this is the direction that we need to go and that this is what we need to do to right the ship and right the wrongs that have been.
So you used a cool metaphor, journey and direction. And it suggests like steps and pacing.
Yes.
And maybe that's something we can interrogate a little bit. It's like people are starting in different places. You have the unenviable job this last few months of facing, this like race crisis in America at a company that's like headquartered in a very, very white state. And it must have been really tricky to, balance all that. So people are coming from different places of knowledge and sympathy, empathy, understanding, et cetera.
Yeah.
Yet you want to make progress. So let's talk about like pacing. So, obviously a common base of some kind of understanding is needed, but how long can you wait? What's the role of the ERGs, which are kind of specialty things versus the whole company stuff?
Yep.
Changing policy, like do you wait until everyone is like at a consensus level of knowledge? Like, let's talk about how much temperature we need to put in the room, how hot should we make the room?
Yeah. So I am looking at pacing everything and sort of creating a foundation of a practice, right? I think that there are things that we need to get right before we move to the next level. We need to get right the process. And the challenge for me has been moving from a smaller organization like Consumer Reports to a larger organization is that at Consumer Reports, our recruitment function was very centralized and controlled. And at Meredith, it's more expansive, it's decentralized. And so how do we create a consistent set of practices around recruitment and how we bring folks into the organization? And so that's been a huge focus area to look at the entirety of our recruitment process, look at our job descriptions, look at our interview process, make it more competency-based, try to mitigate the bias. So that's been foundational for us in this sort of first year, in the midst of the world going crazy. And so, people wanting to see like immediate change, having conversations with people of color, and they're like, we need, leadership representation. Well, we can plant the seeds for that, but short of the CEO saying, you know what, the entire leadership team goes and then we'll have a new leadership team, you're not going to see that change, right? And so I have to balance, teaching an organization how to move through this process, also balance the frustrations of people who are like, we've been in this situation, the world is on fire right now, we want to see immediate change. And sort of balancing those two spaces of saying that we will see change, it's going to take a while, this is not a sprint, it's a marathon, and building that muscle memory for our leaders. Because I can say in all honesty, I've been at Meredith since September, but I've seen, even after my arrival, we've still made some employment decisions where it was like that knee-jerk thing. Oh, we have an open role, I know a great person, let's put them in. So that was a missed opportunity right there, right? And so it's a process, and it will take a while to do that. And so I am trying to lead with a sense of urgency around the conversations. And so that's why we've had a bunch of corporate-wide conversations around race, also around like mental health and wellness in that space too, because it's just so much that people have been dealing with COVID and with this racial reckoning. So we had hosted a bunch of sessions around just like maintaining mental health in this space, and understanding how that's important to the conversation as well. I forgot.
Well, help me on something. I don't want to let you slip by, because you are a very effective diplomat, clearly. And I'm a startup founder, so I start companies all the time, and we try to tackle impossible things, and I'm super impatient, and I just never want to like let anything take its course. I just want to break it and rebuild it. So if I am somewhere in the community that wants change, I'm closer to Malcolm than I am to Martin, so to speak, Yet my job, like I got to run this company, I got to sound like you a lot of the time. But sometimes I'm speaking to people, and I feel them. I feel them, because I also want to blow this thing up and rebuild it from scratch, and I have no time for this. Are there pockets inside your vast org where where maybe you have like an advanced team that they are a little bit further along, where you're actually encouraging them to make more dramatic change, like maybe inside the ERGs, or maybe in some department over here or something like that? Or has everyone got to kind of stay in sync as you move?
I like alignment. So, I want the activities to be aligned to, what our end goals are. And honestly, personally, I'm more Malcolm than Martin as well, right? But I also know and understand that I can be Malcolm here in my house personally, but in order to get and move an organization, I have to figure out a way to balance that message so that people can hear it, right? And I'm not going to win if people are like, nah, what she's saying is crazy. I can't take to that, right? And so I have to figure out a way to translate what I want to do and also bring people up to where I am, or to where the organization is, or to where just the zeitgeist is, in a way that they can understand it, and then they feel like they can begin to own it, because I cannot be everywhere. I cannot be in every conversation. But if I can spark something in that leader where he says, oh, wait a minute, I had that conversation with Shona. Let me rethink this thing before I do it. You know, that's a win for me, right? And so I think that we have to figure out, and we have to be realistic about what this means. And especially for a larger organization. I think it's easy when you have a smaller, tighter system to break things and fail fast and move and you know, pivot and do all of those things. But when you're dealing with about 5,000 people who are dispersed throughout the country, then, you know, I have to think about it in a way that is, you know, like, what's the message that's most palatable and understandable and actionable for the folks that need to take it?
Yeah, I mean, because you want to make progress. You don't want to just be right, you know, in the wilderness. Yeah.
I've learned that.
Well, and I want to draw you into another thing. I'm just mindful of the time because I feel like we could probably talk for 8 hours, and I'm free. I don't know if you're that free, but I want to take you to real estate for a minute, or maybe for a few minutes. So that's our business, right? Notel. We run this global workplace platform. It's flexible. We help all these companies do stuff. But the industry stinks. I mean, the industry, part of what stinks about the real estate industry is stuff that we as entrepreneurs have come to and thought, oh, it's dysfunctional. Let's find all these things, make it better, more efficient. But part of what smells about it, and from the beginning sort of caught my nose, was it's kind of racist too. I mean, it's like super imbalanced. All the owners of all the buildings, it's like super concentrated in certain kinds of people. Mm-hmm. The brokerages, the like every layer where there's power, it doesn't look like America, so to speak. It is not very inclusive, very few African Americans. Right. And then at the working class, like the guy who's got to deal with the elevator, or even the security guard who has to say to me, hello, sir, as I'm walking through the lobby, mm-hmm. that guy is African American, and it's not up to him. His job is to keep me out because I don't maybe resemble whoever. It kind of stinks, right? And in some ways you're lucky because media in some ways perhaps has higher ideals. Mm-hmm. I've never even heard real estate talk about ideals. And we're in here trying to change it. And I wonder how you would counsel us on our special obligation, because now I'm taking you out of HR department. Mm-hmm. Because anti-racist isn't just like, hey, let's hire and retain African Americans and make sure they're paid fairly and they're advancing. Sure, that's part of it. Yeah, our workforce is hugely important. But we operate in a society, and for us, we operate in a particular industry that, I mean, it needs to change.
Right. So yeah.
Help us think about that. And you spent some years working in the business, right? So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that conversation needs to be a little bit different for the real estate space, because it's about ownership and how do you give access to that owner class, or that, you know, the folks that make the decisions. How do you create and give away some of that, right? And are people willing to do that? Because I feel like with real estate, and especially those folks that own, they want to own more, not less, right? They don't want to share. So how do you begin that conversation? I think that that's where you begin the conversation, is that, you know, how do we give people of color access to ownership so that they can begin making those other decisions that are being made in these spaces where, you know, it's only a certain group of people there. Yeah, that to me feels like
that one's gonna be tough.
How do you get share? Because it's one thing, even just the notion of sharing power is disruptive to a lot of folks. People do not want to give away their power. People do not want to give access to what they consider power. And that's been the fight, is that even in the corporate space, it's about sharing power. And I forgot the quote, but it's like, when you're privileged, equality feels like oppression, right? And so how do you just start that conversation within the real estate space of, you know, we've had access. I don't know if you've seen the Kimberly Latrice Jones Monopoly video. It kind of went viral, but she was basically talking about a Monopoly game that Black people have not have access to for 400 rounds, right? And so how do you create that? And even when they've created those means of becoming owners, it was destroyed, right? So like now you just have folks who are like, well, I don't even want to be successful because if I'm successful, who's going to come and try to destroy this for me? So the amount of conversation that needs to happen with folks in that space, like the owner class of people, has to start, you know, at a very fundamental level and at a heart level. Like, how are you going to change your heart to to create space for other people and not try to destroy it if you feel like they're becoming too successful?
Yeah, I mean, I think I kind of caught you a little bit unfairly because you've got this like really great system when you were talking on people stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you come to real estate, it's obviously an enormous problem, right? But I wonder if I could draw you to make an analogy. So like, you know, you had whatever diversity metric and you wanted to move it by this much and you break the problem down and here's the pieces. Maybe for our respective companies and maybe for everyone who helps to lead a company, you want to sort of look outside. Yeah, you can see these big, enormous problems. And then maybe there's some tangible set of goals that you can try to disaggregate, like, you know, diversity in vendors, diversity in other kinds of business partners, making sure you're doing this and that, you know, maybe making sure you take more looks at properties that are owned maybe by African-American owners. I don't know. Is there a way to like break it down and turn it into this kind of pragmatic system that you had sketched? When you look outside the bounds of the company, because I do think that's probably one of the biggest changes of the last 4 or 5 months. Like once we start talking anti-racism, it's more than our own diversity. It's probably our impact in society, right?
Absolutely. I think, I mean, honestly, I don't feel educated enough in real estate. You know, I worked for a property management company that managed Co-op City. So they pretty much had the one client, one huge client, and we managed that huge property. So I just like to feel like I know enough about what the processes are, what the, you know, what the levers are before I opine on what needs to change in terms of creating diversity in that space. And I don't know enough about what.
I think that's a really wise comment, though. I guess essentially you're saying you got to like taxonomize the machine, the levers, the little hidden processes. And as you start making it more visible, then you start seeing what are the opportunities, fix this, fix that.
Yeah.
There's great wisdom in that. Maybe as we're getting to the end of our time together, where would you point folks? So let's say somebody's just been watching you share your wisdom here, and now they're like, you know what? I want to totally energize my own company and move it faster, harder, maybe even in a different direction. What's like the next step? Where would you walk into your CEO's office and be like, read this or call this person or do this thing? Like, how do you start that journey or accelerate it?
Mm-hmm. There's a good book by Minda Hart, and it's called The Memo, and it's about like Black women in the moving to the C-suite. But I think that there is a lot in that book that gives a broader understanding of how an organization needs to operate in order to create space and create opportunities for other people, period. Black women in particular, because that book was written for that. But I think that it gives a nice broad understanding. I do think that White Fragility is a good book, you know, in terms of creating, for me, it helped create some understanding around how to approach the conversation with white people. Prior to this year, a lot of this diversity work, it didn't even really have any discussion of white people in it. It was really about, okay, how do we, you know, create opportunities for people of color and Black people and LGBTQ, but it really did not talk about white people. And, you know, the aha moment that I had was like, okay, so I'm not racist, right? But it's mainly people who look like me who are running diversity departments. And so the work of this has not been the work of white people. And so I do think that we need to integrate white people into the discussion more. and actually like take some of the burden off of people of color and spread it out a little bit more. I think there's a lot more work.
I don't think that people of color invented racism against themselves, nor do they prosecute it all day long. It is quite amazing. I think it's a very good point.
Yeah, and so you know, I just think that there needs to be more work on the side of white people in this discussion. There needs to be more resilience from white people in this discussion, because you know, now it's like, oh, it's 2 months in already, enough. No,
right. Yeah, 400 years. How about that? Yeah.
Of years. So, you know, like I try to explain that whole resilience piece, is that this is a long journey. We will not solve this in another month, in another year. And so that is like foundational in terms of the advice that I give to folks as they begin this process, is that you have to have patience. I'm not a patient person, but I espouse the need for patience as you build this, because like I said, we're trying to break human behavior, and that's very difficult.
Shona, I appreciate so much. I'm sure our audience here is all snapping along. This has really been terrific. Your accomplishments are so impressive, and now you've got this huge platform. I mean, just imagine as you carry forward at Meredith, it reaches millions and millions and millions of people.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah, it's an exciting,
amazing.
Exciting opportunity.
Thank you so much for being with us.
We
are recording, so this thing is something that I'll send around to you and to the other attendees, and they'll be able to watch it and show their parents and say, hey, they actually got to talk to.
Thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.
All right.